Lawyers of Reddit, what's the worst way you've seen a person screw over someone else in court, whether it be criminal, civil, or divorce proceedings? Nasty custody fight. The ex-wife was a lawyer and represented herself. The ex-husband had a pretty shitty lawyer. She kept hauling things back to court trying to get more benefits from him, and his lawyer just let it keep happening, and it was destroying his life. Allegations of child abuse, was taking so much money that he could barely afford a shit apartment, and couldn't afford a car, which both figured in later for custody. Finally, the ex-wife's father, also a lawyer, asked to meet with the judge, and mentioned a few things that he knew were going on. One of the children was manic depressive and the ex-wife would take him off his meds before it was the ex-husband's turn for custody. The child abuse allegations were from the ex-husband trying to restrain the child during a manic episode because he wasn't medicated. The ex-wife had intentionally timed the child abuse allegation to fall just before the holidays so the ex-husband couldn't see the kids for Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas. She bragged to family that it would do the maximum emotional damage possible doing it then. The ex-wife had forged documents to overstate the ex-husband's income when alimony was being determined. Oh, and the ex-wife was sleeping with the ex-husband's lawyer. More of a case of screwing himself over, but here goes. This was a case another prosecutor in my office had a few years back. 30-year-old defendant was charged with sexual assault of a child after he got his girlfriend's 14-year-old sister pregnant. She actually kept the baby, so the police just waited and got a paternity test. No surprise, defendant was the father. Defendant wanted probation. Prosecutor refused to offer it. He decided to plead guilty and have a jury trial on punishment. Here in Texas, you can choose to have a jury set punishment. Evidence mostly proceeded as expected. The victim testified to having consensual, aside from not being old enough to consent, sex with the defendant, getting pregnant, etc. Paternity test introduced. Defendant took the stand. His version of events was that he snuck into victim's room at night, covered her mouth, and held her down while he forcibly had sex with her against her will. It seemed like his own lawyer had no idea that's the story he settled on. The jury deliberated about 15 minutes before returning a verdict of 17 years. The maximum possible as charged was 20. When interviewed by the attorneys afterwards, one of them said they decided on 17 years so the defendant would never forget the age of consent in Texas again. There's a lawyer in my town who has a reputation for being a real dick. He left a very successful firm to go off on his own. He and the firm negotiated which clients he would take and how eventual fees from those clients would be divided. All seemed fine and dandy. As soon as he's out the door, he sues his old firm saying the deal is unenforceable and that he should 100% of the fees from the clients who came with him. He lost and appealed, lost again and appealed to the state Supreme Court, where they shut his ass down and, in extremely diplomatic language, pretty much called him a dick. One time, I saw an indigent defendant who was in custody tell the judge his public defender wasn't working hard enough and he wanted the judge to appoint different counsel. The judge asked him what specifically was the problem, and he said, "I don't want a female lawyer. I need a man who can take charge and fight for me," or something very similar to that. The judge, also female, said that's not how it works. Then he started yelling and getting into specifics about his public defender. Just mainly, "I don't like her, she won't visit me," etc. The judge is annoyed and looks at him and is like, "Fine, I'll appoint another attorney for you, but because you are not satisfied with your attorney and I need time to appoint you new counsel, I'm not going to hear any other issues today and will reset your case." A few days later, the judge sends defendant notice of his new appointed attorney, who happens to also be female, and notice of the case reset for 6 weeks. The case was originally set for a bond hearing and the dad and his PD had agreed to release him on an unsecured bond, meaning he would have gotten out that day if he hadn't thrown his temper tantrum. Instead, he waited another 6 weeks in jail just to have another female attorney represent. I've seen a parent use non-existent discipline as a tool to win over their teenage child so that the child will choose to live with said rubbish parent, and rubbish parent will receive child support from the other parent. It boils my blood seeing someone allowing their 15-year-old child to drop out of school, get high every day, buy them drugs, alcohol, just about every negative thing you could do to a kid, just so they don't have to pay $100 in child support a month. Was involved in a custody case where a wife cheated on her husband and had a child as a result. She let husband believe the child was his until she was about 5 years old and they were divorcing. To stop him from getting custody, she convinced the biological father to try to get custody, thinking that if he won she would wind up with the child. Became a huge three-way fight, multiple sets of grandparents involved, attorney's fees skyrocketed because the case would have been pretty quick otherwise. She couldn't pay her attorney, tried to get the BO dad to, got even messier, etc. Basically there still isn't an agreement all parties will follow. They are in and out of court every year or so. She screwed herself. This story always gets me. My biological grandmother died 20 years ago of ovarian cancer. She left all her money, trusts, bonds to my grandfather to use while alive and disperse after death. My grandfather remarried something like 15 years ago to my step-grandma. My grandfather ended up dying first a few years back. My step-aunt is a greedy bitch who lives on the opposite side of the country. She's lived off of her mother and my grandfather for all of her life. She'd come over and take them on vacation, where she'd use their money to buy herself things and get a free skiing trip about 8x a year. After my grandfather passed, my step-grandma had to move where her children lived to get care for dementia. My step-aunt has access to not only her own mother's estate, but my grandfather's as well, to take care of her needs. That wasn't enough. She decided to try and sue my dad and uncle for their dead biological mother's estate. My dad is bilaterally paralyzed and in a wheelchair. My uncle is a triple bypass survivor with a pacemaker and multiple stints. Both are on fixed disability income. The court date came and I literally wheeled my dad in while my uncle walked with a cane. My step-aunt is entirely able-bodied and rolling in the millions my step-grandma and grandfather worked their whole lives to earn. The judge took one look at the whole picture and she was absolutely denied access to my biological grandmother's estate. We were there for less than an hour. This wasn't my case, but followed it closely because it was an acquaintance's divorce proceedings. He and his now ex-wife shared some commercial property that was worth some dough. They were both on the paperwork/FAR access to the same info. Well, some shit hit the fan and the property was in arrears, and I think some lien was filed. The husband would try to talk to his then wife about the whole thing and she would blow him off. Not only would she ignore him and the finances, she started cheating on him. Fast forward to divorce. It's contentious and they get down to fighting for the primary residence whose market value, unencumbered, is much less than the commercial building. She demanded the house and the husband effectively offered to give her the commercial building if he could keep the residence. She never paid attention to how bad off the commercial building was, and for some strange reason her lawyer didn't do any due diligence, so they took the deal. I don't know if the asset allocation included any saving conditions or caveats for the ex-wife, but I'd like to see that her own disinterest may have led to bargaining for an underwater property instead of a paid-off house. I have been in dispute with British Gas for around 10 years. Every now and again they take me to court. Every time I win, and we go away for another few years. The last time I lawyered up, it's in a magistrate's, even though it's a civil matter. My solicitor waited for the British Gas guy to swear his oath, to tell the truth, the whole truth, etc. Then asked him what he knew of the previous court cases. When the guy said he didn't know anything about them, my solicitor ripped into him saying he just claimed to tell the whole truth. So clearly nothing he says can be trusted. It went on for a few minutes. It was kind of brutal. The magistrates agreed, and we walked away with £600 in costs. It was a joy to watch this bloke who was all, "We are coming to make entry to your house and the police will help," before we went and be told to sit down and not say anything else, unless he was asked a question. To fend off some of the questions, it's to do with a disconnected meter at my house, for electric to a closed shop. I have written to the seer, I've had my MP involved, and been to court 4 times. British Gas don't change, don't listen, so I've given up. I'll just go to court every now and again, and claim my £600. I'm being sparse on details here due to confidentiality, but I had a client who was accused of a very nasty sexual offense. He had an alibi. He was at work, where he was the boss. He had an employee who could absolutely vouch for his being there. I talked to the employee confirmed this. It gets closer to the trial, and around the time when I need to send in an alibi notice, which is advance notice to the Crown, so that they can investigate the alibi and determine whether or not it's true. But I'm being careful, so I call the employee up again. Turns out my client fired him in the interim, and so the employee quite candidly tells me, "Oh, yeah, he was definitely at work. But that's not what I'll say in court. Fuck that guy, he is going down." I did not call him as a witness or file the alibi notice. Still won the trial, but if I hadn't thought to call the guy, or if he'd been less candid, my client would have been fucked hard. Sex offender registry, jail time, the works. Completely innocent. Not someone else, but himself. The guy and his lawyer missed court appearances, sometimes one of them, sometimes both, with little or no warning, and with suspect excuses. It started getting ridiculous, and we kept pointing out holes in his story, like he said he left for another country without knowing about the appearance, but his lawyer stood in court and said he told him beforehand. Or all of a sudden he was in a former Soviet bloc country for fertility treatments, and it would ruin everything if he came back now. Or when he was visiting dying relatives on another continent. Or he was going to the airport when he had to rush to the hospital and showed us an admitting form in another language that we translated. It showed he was there but also that he was discharged. He also tried firing his attorney and saying he needed more time to brief a new attorney who at the next appearance would say he hasn't been able to talk to his client so he needs to adjourn. Or that he hasn't been paid and his client is basically an ass and he needs to be relieved. We kept saying to the judge he was doing it to stall, but the judge kept giving him the benefit of the doubt. We even showed him other cases where he skipped appearances and the judges threatened sanctions. Until finally he didn't show up for an appearance where the judge had specifically told him, "I don't care if you're meeting with the Pope, I'm ordering you to be here." Boom. His answer was stricken. Default judgment in full was granted to our side. Neither he nor his lawyer showed up for the hearing where the judge determined exactly how much of a judgment we should get, and then had the nerve to file a motion that the judgment was unfair because he didn't get a chance to dispute anything. Too many criminal client situations to count of them screwing themselves over. One of the very few family law cases I handled as a young atty sticks out to me though. Young woman and young man have child. Young woman seeks divorce from young man because he enjoys the thug life. He had recently been arrested and charged for possession w/int to distribute meth, felony, and in possession of a firearm, and lawful carry. Young man doesn't like her leaving him. He hires a local big name top divorce atty, granted, very rural area. Gets temp divorce order entered saying she cannot have overnight guests of the opposite sex. Common and rural conservative areas think it's mostly a thing of the past in more urban places. Young woman starts seeing someone new. Young man is very upset about this. Has his fancy lawyer ask for a hearing accusing her of violating court order and seeking full custody on top of atty fees. Young woman, on advice from a mutual friend, hires me for this hearing. I sit down with opposing counsel, and she basically tries to strong arm me w/her experience, and lays out egregious terms. Mother must not only give up primary custody, but must have visitation with a supervisor, and pay child support and atty fees. She knows I'm a new baby atty in town, fairly certain I had been licensed for less than a year. I balk and she says she'll see us in court. I go into hearing with a copy of his probation arrangement on his post w/intent to sell and unlawful carry. He hasn't told his atty about this, and she is unaware. She calls him up, establishes how my client had her new BF over on X, Y, Z nights. Judge is very conservative, not pleased. Then, opposing counsel passes the witness. I ask him if he has a job. No. What do you do for money? Things here and there. Oh. Milliseconds. Opposing counsel is awfully expensive. Do you sell meth? What? Have you ever sold drugs to make ends meet? No. Introduce a copy of his guilty plea and straight probation sentencing. Judge is now staring daggers at him. I lean over to my client sitting next to me and whisper, if you took a drug test today, be honest, would you be completely clean? Yes. I ask the young man, when was the last time you did meth? He objects, but judge overrules. I know this judge will drug test people on the spot as he is also the misdemeanor drug court judge. It's been years, I'm clean. So, if you were tested, you'd be clean? Yes. Opposing counsel asks the same of my client, we agree. Judge has them both tested. He tests positive for meth. My client is clean. Judge denies his motion and asks me to send in new temp orders where young man is required to maintain employment and start paying child support and places him on supervised visits. Icing on the cake, opposing counsel actually calls me and leaves me a voicemail congratulating me on, and I quote, handing her ass to her for the first time in a long time. Had a criminal jury trial for misdemeanor criminal mischief over 4 years ago. State filed charges and kept amending the information to the point where they left the actual victim out of the trial and proceeded with the 2 eyewitnesses. Well, one of the witnesses was my client's ex and the other witness was the ex's new GF. They claimed my client vandalized the actual victim's car. Client denied everything. Well, apparently, the state and both witnesses had no idea that the ex had a outstanding warrant for not paying child support to my client, which created a motive for him to lie. Asked him if he was aware that he had a warrant out for his arrest on the stand. He didn't know. The judge excused the jurors. The bailiffs arrested the ex on the stand. State rested. Judge granted our motion for judgment of acquittal because we had good case law for the victim not being there. Client walked away free and the ex went to jail.